Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Perspective Philosophy, where we try to better our perceptions of the world through philosophical discussion. In today's episode, I will be responding to you, the audience, from some of the best questions I've received over the course of having this channel. But before I begin, I have some very exciting news. I am now pre-saling my course, An Introduction to Western Philosophy, and in that course, you will be given an introduction to every major field in philosophy throughout time. With over 20 hours of lectures and the benefits of my 10 years of experience, I will be taking you through a long conversation with the greatest minds of human history. This course will be primarily continental philosophy and engage with thinkers relevant to that discipline. So if you'd like to pick up a copy of my course, check out the description below for 33% off, and let's get into the video. I got a question from ASM who said that I adopted 3 newborn kittens that were left in the trash. How is the act of saving them by feeding them other animals immoral? Should I have left them to die? So first of all, I do not think you are wrong for saving those kittens' lives. I probably would have done the same. I also don't think you should have left them to die. But then I would also say you would have been right to leave them to die. So if someone had left them to die or helped them in that case, for the reasons of preserving animal life, they would have both been right. That's the problem. This is what Hegel calls tragedy. The confliction between two rights, two obligations, two things you should do. How do you choose between them? Each action has a moral weight to it, involved between your obligation to the other, and so you're presented a scenario where you have to reject one to save many. Or in this case, 3 to save many. But it's not so simple. We are not utilitarians, and we understand that in our moral decision-making process, it's not just the consequences that we consider. We consider something else. Obligation. Do we have a greater institutional obligation to those kittens than other animals? And the answer is probably yes. But we know that to be false. We know that that is a bias, a prejudice. It's unfounded within our society, so we reject it and we establish a vegan mentality. But we, under that vegan mentality, still value those kittens. I don't think you are wrong for respecting the value of the kitten. I think you are wrong for disrespecting the value of another animal to save the kitten. Do I think that you should have done it? I can't say that you should have done it, and I can't say that you shouldn't have done it without respect to the fact that other animals are always going to die because of their consumption. However, in recent weeks, I've come to find that cats can apparently be vegan anyway, so this should remedy the problem. This for Hegel is ethical progress, where you have been enlightened of a new action which aligns the confliction and duties. Now you can save the cats and not condemn the cows. So the next question is given by the Esoteric Zebra, which is a brilliant name, by the way. And it basically asks whether the consumption and death of animals is worth it because animals are born to live for a small amount of time. In other words, in a non-vegan world, animals wouldn't be born, which means that animals wouldn't get to experience that short part of their life before death to be consumed. So in other words, would it not be better to have animals that we eat so that the animals get at least a chance to survive? And my response was no. And it will always be no. In the case of birthing animals, I see the point. What you're saying is that would it not be a net positive overall, in the grand scheme of things, that there was more pleasure in the world? That we could look and see that the animal has had some subjectivity, that the animal existed, and that means something. The animal's life means something. But I don't see an issue here. If the animal isn't born, then there is no loss in meaning, because the meaning was never a positive or a negative, it was zero. If the animal is born into hideous torture, it's a negative. And it's a negative beyond all recompense, usually. It's a life that we would characterize as being unworth living. And if that's the case, then obviously we shouldn't have animals. But what about animals that are birthed into good conditions but then killed prematurely? What about those? Well, what I would say is that when we consider the interests of an animal, and we can always consider the interests of the animal, we shouldn't be thinking about birthing the next generation. So what about cows as a whole? Because then we've lost what a cow is. A cow is an animal, it's an individual. And when we talk about cows, what we're actually talking about is a group of individuals. We aren't talking about an abstract universal concept. And if we keep that in mind, then the life of every individual is the end goal. It is the benefit for every individual. They are all ends in themselves, all deserving of the same experience. And if we realize that we would have to sacrifice someone's experience to give the possibility of a better experience to another, or the possibility of a okay experience to another who has no interest in having that experience, then we are being immoral. We are being unethical. So what I would say, if we are coming to the point in which we've birthed animals, they are living around us and we engage with them, we are ethically obligated to treat them as equals, with equal consideration. Now, that doesn't mean we give them the same things as every human. They don't get the right to vote and so on, but they do get the right to life. And killing an animal, any animal, so that you can birth more with the potential of giving them a decent life, it's unjustified. And ultimately, that kind of reasoning is unsustainable. It's abstract, it's empty, and it can justify nearly anything. So really, what I would suggest is getting off the individual consequentialistic thought patterns, stop focusing so much on the consequences and focus on the reasons. Putting any animal through suffering for the potential pleasure of another would be absolutely unjustified. So the next question I received was from FRVR, who asked what were the philosophy books that shaped me and that I would most recommend. Okay, so actually, the philosophy books that have most shaped me, I would say are... primary literature, I would say, has had a really great effect on us. So I think the Socratic dialogues were very shaping for me in my early years of philosophy. Reading the early Socratic dialogues really gave me an insight into ethics that I think was immensely beneficial. It gave me an understanding of ethics that shaped my view towards an ethikos perspective rather than a moral perspective, and I never really got caught up in that so much. I did focus very much on behavior. So I would recommend the early Platonic texts such as Gorgias and Protagoras. The next that I would recommend is After Virtue by Alistair MacIntyre. That has had an amazing effect on me. It gives such a wide variety of different positions and insights into so many different fields that I can honestly say that I am humbled when I read that book from the vast amount of knowledge it contains. It is such a brilliant book and I could not recommend it more. The next I would say that have shaped me would be David Rowe's Free Will and Continental Philosophy. I think that it gave me a greater understanding of the question of free will from a continental perspective that I really appreciated. It kind of put the pieces of freedom together in front of me. I'd already read Hegel by this point and I already believed in free will, but I didn't understand how to approach particularly analytics with this point. I always got bogged down in talking about free will and what the will is and everything else, but this allowed it to flow nicely into a position which characteristically is different from how people treat the problem of free will. And I think that's been immensely beneficial to me. So those are the books that I would recommend. So I would say the early Platonic texts, David Rowe's Free Will and Continental Philosophy, and Alistair MacIntyre, After Virtue. And I will throw a link in the description below so you can pick up any of those books if you want. The next question I received was, I can't be an objectivist without believing in free will. The answer is no. So I would say that free will is a fundamental integral part of any ethical theory. So any generalization in ethics is going to require the epistemological grounding of free will to allow for the normativity to function properly. If it didn't, then nothing is objective and I wouldn't really worry about it. You kind of lost all knowledge. So yeah, I would say that you should believe in free will anyway because you have it, and check out my last video on that. But ultimately, no, you can't be an objectivist if you don't believe in free will. Thank you for your question. So the last question, or questions I should say, come from Scott King. He said, If I choose what I consume, how am I a slave? How would socialism, choosing what I consume for me, by giving me what everyone else consumes, free me? Okay, that's a great question, Scott. So what I would say is that socialism doesn't choose for you. You can have a market within socialism. You can have a variation of producers, independent corporations that are worker controlled and worker owned that exist independently of the state, producing products which can be consumed by anyone. Like when we talk about market socialism or we talk about anarchical syndicalism or whatever it is, we are going to be discussing the democratization of the market. We're not talking about the domination of the market by the state. That is not what any socialist in their right mind wants. Anyone who is looking for state domination and state control misses the point of socialism. And they're probably hopped up on Lenin and Trotsky and they're just ready for a good fight. So yeah, I wouldn't listen to anyone from that position. But to answer your question, why socialism would free you more is because it would allow for ethical consumption. Profits would not be ridiculous, people would not be competing indefinitely, and competition would be allowed to develop based on ethical issues. I would also say in a socialist environment, we would see ethical consumerism. The market has to be regulated by responsible consumers just as much as by producers. When the consumer lets the power go, we see this degradation of humanity into this binging animal that consumes hedonistically as much as possible, and is unfortunately a byproduct of this post-capitalist mildew, and hopefully will be long gone if we manage to get to socialism. But in case it's not, then we would also have to say that the market should be regulated by the overall body of the public. We would prevent certain things from being sold. The market is ultimately by the people, for the people, and in this way can only benefit the people. If it does go off course and starts acting in a way that causes greater harm to overall society, then it is the job of the people to reel it back in. So yeah, this gives you much greater freedom. You gain control politically, you gain control economically of your own livelihood and what you do, and you also gain a fair relationship between yourself as a worker with others and also as a consumer at the marketplace. You have a great deal more control here, and I would wholeheartedly recommend checking out anarcho-socialism. So the next question he asked was whether I believe in hierarchies, like, power differentials between individuals. So I tell you what to do and you do as you're told kind of mentality. Well, I'm not against hierarchies actually, but I am against unjustified hierarchies. So in other words, I would separate between two types of power: justified power and unjustified power. So unjustified power and authority is given by the people with free consent to the body of authority. Think of a government which was democratically elected and fairly elected in that way. The greater the amount of participation the individual has within the electoral process, the greater amount of power that they have, and the greater amount of power they can give to the individual that they elect. That being said, it has its limits. So the boss that is freely elected by the individuals within the corporation or politic is then given the authority by the people, for the people, and should be held to the legislation that the people are held to. So there should be accountability. The second thing I would say is that there needs to be a way to remove the legislator or the authority figure from office, from their position. If there's not, then it is not democratic, and ultimately people can become, lied and coerced to, and then ultimately ruled for a period of their lives. And they're locked forever in this loop with this undemocratically elected manipulative leader. So I do believe in hierarchies. I just believe that there can be justified and unjustified hierarchization. Also, I wouldn't separate hierarchy with equality. It's not like you are being unequal to another individual when you are their leader. If you are their leader because they've asked you to please lead them through this scenario, and they ultimately give you that power, then there is nothing wrong with that. Leadership can be useful and it can be beneficial to people. The issue is when leaders lose what a leader should be and fall into what they want to be. If they want to be a god or a master, then they aren't your leader. Your leader represents your interests, and they are benevolent and empathetic. If you want a question answered in a video just like this one, leave it in the comment section below and I'll see if I can get to it in next week's video. Thank you all again for watching, and as always, try to gain some perspective.